Welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. We've got Natasha, the pro CPO, from IBM, McKesson, Salesforce, and most recently Mike, and now head of candidate procurement. We've got Conrad back in the room with us again from Intel, CPO at Adobe, and now founder and CEO of one of the hottest procurement startups, Graphite. And you've got Zach, your expert on procurement. We join you with almost 70 years of practical procurement experience. And here in the podcast, we're going to discuss the latest and greatest trends and topics in procurement. So whether you're new to procurement or a seasoned veteran, we have the discussions that will elevate your thinking while keeping you grounded in practical procurement and value. So welcome again, Conrad, Natasha, nice to see you. And let's jump straight into today's discussion. Today's question, really picking up on the last conversation we had around what skill sets are needed in procurement. I think one of the ones that came out was radical openness to feedback. Giving feedback is a way to take responsibility for how you experience others. Your feedback is a gift. It gives others an opportunity to learn how they may be impacting you and others. So we're going to have a conversation today around that. I think a lot of our listeners, whether they're leaders in procurement or whether they're procurement practitioners, can benefit from these kinds of conversations. So question number one, why is feedback important? Natasha, what do you think?
We all have blind spots, and not knowing what they are will put us in perpetual cycle of repeating the same mistakes. And if we have people who are willing in a candid and loving manner to tell us, this is your blind spot. You may not know this, but when you behave this way, or you communicate this way, or you act this way, you're not presenting the best part of yourself. More often than not, especially when we're in the beginning of our career, that actually may come as a surprise. And I think the importance of the feedback is that it helps us to collect the different opinions and points of views of people around us on how they experience us, that help us shape up the best version of us.
Conrad?
No, sure. I was just going to jump in. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you were going to comment there. To me, feedback is such a critical thing. From a leadership perspective, a personal growth and development perspective, we've all heard that, the continuous learning is so important. And how about this idea of learning about ourselves, continuing to grow and learn and develop? All of these things are very obvious and practical to us. In fact, this topic feels almost like, yeah, everybody gets it at an academic way. But when you get down to practical purposes, it's a lot more difficult than that. I was listening to a book this morning that was talking about feedback. And one of the things it said is 2/3 of the people that were surveyed actually want to receive critical or helpful feedback like Natasha's talking about. But everybody, think about your own experience, everybody has an aversion to receiving that critical feedback as well. It kind of kicks in that mammalian brain of ours where we're like fight or flight kicks in, maybe they don't like me, maybe I'm not going to belong, maybe I don't fit, maybe I'm not good enough, all these things happen. And so there's this really underlying natural aversion to actually participate in an effective feedback process. So we're kind of working against nature in some ways here, because I may actually even want to give you feedback, but I'm uncomfortable with it because the whole thing feels like maybe it will be received as an attack. And and on the other side, when somebody gives me feedback, I kind of might have the risk of feeling a little bit attacked as well. So we need this feedback, like Natasha says, but I think naturally we sort of, it's really basic, but naturally most people sort of avoid it, really doing it effectively because of the taboo around it, I guess I would say.
How do you get yourself into a mindset then where you're open to receive feedback, and how do you have sort of the filters in place that'll help you sort of keep an objective view, take the points that will really help you, and maybe, not all feedback is great feedback. I think you need to get the same kind of feedback from multiple places before you can really definitively say, yeah, this is something I need to take on board. So how do people get into that mindset then, Natasha? Do you have a view of, in your personal experience, how do you make yourself ready to receive feedback? How you get prepared for it?
Well, I just want to express double, triple agreement with what Conrad said about us receiving feedback goes against our nature. We want to be liked. We're humans. We want to hear the nice things about ourselves. And I think that first thing in kind of like smoothing that defensive mechanism, it actually not to wait for feedback, is actually to request it, right? And to ask for it first, kind of like be proactive in that. And I think the question with which you ask for feedback is very important. Like the question that over the years worked for me is asking people, whether it's my direct reports, my peers, my boss, two levels below, like skip level, or just anyone in my ecosystem who I interacted with, right? I asked them a question: how have you experienced me? How have you experienced working with me, right? It's not about what do you like about me, what you don't like about me. It's in that question, like, how have you experienced me? It kind of like, it disarms the person in front of me that they don't have to talk about me. They have to talk about experience working with me. And I think that we all need to come to that point, realizing that we won't grow in our roles or in our personality if we wouldn't know how we are perceived, right? And if we request for feedback on a regular basis, then we will know what is the theme and what is one man opinion. And if it's a one person opinion, then it's up to us if we take it into consideration or dismiss.
I think that's just awesome question. I'm curious, like for an example, I've never used that question. Usually I say something like, what feedback do you have for me? How can I better help you be successful? Or, something like that to get through it. But when you ask that question, what's an example of how people typically respond to that question?
They talk about experience working with me, that felt that this was well organized or well communicated or smooth, or this, if it would be structured differently, would probably generate greater participation or response from the group of people.
Yeah. How do you make sure, Natasha, that the feedback that you'll get is really honest and completely open and transparent? Because very often you can ask someone for feedback and they'll sort of moderate the feedback, right? Because they don't want to upset you or, affect the relationship in any way. Maybe you're a senior leader requesting feedback from someone more junior, for example, especially when you want some of that critical feedback. How do you set a culture where people feel comfortable to do that?
For me, it's consistency and actionability. If you request, if requesting and receiving feedback is part of your operating model and you do it on a quarterly basis across your entire leadership team, and you expect that your leadership team trickles it down to their teams, if you do that regularly and responsibility is on you, on the leader, to make sure that it's done, then people realize that you take it seriously. It's not just the flavor of the month. It's not just to put the check mark in your annual goals, that creating a culture of receiving and providing feedback, right? That you're serious about it. So consistency would be one, and actionability would be another one. That when people provide you feedback, and if you see that it's a theme and not the one person opinion, then you act upon it, however defensive you can be inside.
I think that's such great advice. So you get the feedback to show the person, to foster that culture of openness to even more feedback. You do need to go and take the actions and show that you're taking the feedback on board. I mean, Conrad, do you have any views on, again, how best to receive, to request feedback?
Well, I love the question Natasha's talking about. My guess is that there's multiple ways to frame it, one way or the other. And I think how you feel most comfortable wording it and presenting it, I think is, do what's most comfortable. I love what Natasha said though about, consistency. If feedback is the first item, like feedback, how can I do my job better, or how have you experienced working with me, is the first item on our agenda, with some, like, maybe not every week, maybe it's every 2 weeks, but it's like there, it's always there. That we're going to talk about it when we're there. I think that's really helpful. And then I would say that it kind of starts getting into the, how do I receive feedback? Because a big part, you can ask for feedback one time and respond badly, and you will never get honest feedback after that. Like, there's not very many, like, rebuilding the trust and the belief that you actually care. It is really important, right? So receiving, you ask for feedback, you receive the feedback, but how you receive it actually changes as to whether you're going to get more feedback. And maybe that first volley of feedback coming your direction is just a test, actually. Like, oh, I have some really critical feedback about you, Zach. Your beard is to this, or, you dress funny, or whatever it is. I have this really stuff that might be hard to deliver, but I'm going to start with, something that's a little softer to see if you're truly open, you really receive it. And so, whether you agree with it or not, I think we all have, if you're going to receive more feedback, you want to receive more feedback, the person has to feel very safe, right? Like, deep level of appreciation, and, not getting into this big denial place, or, an argument, or like making the person feel uncomfortable, because they're going to feel just like receiving it. Like Natasha, you said, we have this natural, we want to be liked. The person giving it wants to be liked too, right? And they're really feeling vulnerable. Like, I can say this and then I'm going to be cast out of the tribe, because, they don't like me anymore. So making sure they feel welcome, they feel appreciated, they feel heard. Doesn't mean you have to accept it from I'm going to take action on a perspective, but they need to know it was a safe thing to do. And that opens up, I think. So I guess what I'm saying, it isn't just the one-time request, it's how you actually deal with that actually truly opens the door to a culture of receiving feedback over time, and, requesting it over time in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I find I try to do that a lot in my own role, Conrad, because obviously I work with small teams sometimes, and I try to foster that kind of culture. And the way I do that is by taking the leadership action and constantly asking for feedback, and making it a place where everyone knows that asking for feedback is something that is normal, is expected. I think you want to set kind of the standard, right? And you would hope that over time that culture develops, and then your relationships develop and become better with your team members, and so everyone feels ready to give you feedback at any point. But that takes time, doesn't it? I think to your point, the first kind of wave of feedback you get is more of a test. Is it just the first wave, or does it really take a long time? A team needs to sort of come together over a period of many months, right? For everyone to feel safe, to then start to provide the feedback. It's not a quick process, is it? I think it is a real culture and mindset shift, and it takes a lot of continuous effort, consistency, as you were both talking about.
I think relationships of any nature, whether it's in our personal life, like a girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, like all of these different relationships are based on these same principles. They're just kind of universally true. And so of giving and receiving feedback, like, this is a normal part of a healthy relationship. And that feedback is honest, is maybe a thermometer, a barometer of the quality of the relationship. Do you feel like you have to hold things back, or that people aren't going to really tell you what they think? So, go ahead, Zach.
Well, I was gonna ask, we can talk a little bit about receiving, maybe just deep dive on that a little bit. So we all have a natural propensity to get excited when we hear like positive things about ourselves. And sometimes when you get negative feedback, you sort of deflate a little bit. So how do you help your teammates be receptive to feedback and stop people from feeling defensive? And how do you elevate them even if the feedback isn't complimentary?
I think like lead by example is such an important part of how people do that. I mean, I think we all have a tendency to want to tell people our feedback towards them. Like that's step number one. Like you need to know how I feel. And like this principle of seek first to understand before trying to be understood. I mean, it's exactly the same principle is, show up as somebody that's really trying to understand, how can I show up better for you? How can I serve and support you better? And then that is going to enable them. So I think we need to really pattern and model, exceptional requesting, receiving, and providing feedback, so that the people that we're around at home and at work, particularly in our teams, they can learn these. I guess I would say, I mean, I've been in my career for like 30 years now. I'm 57, almost 60. And this isn't something that I've mastered like 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. When people start saying something to me that feels negative, I feel it like deep inside me. Like I start having this physical reaction. Like, I don't know how you get around that, but there is a place and I don't know where I would put a finger on and said it happened, but I kind of am like, I don't care anymore. Like I don't need to pretend that I'm perfect in order to be successful. And so being comfortable with your skin and be comfortable with who you are. And, it's like there's this transition. So as a person figuring out how to get there and then helping other people feel comfortable, we don't need to be perfect. Like none of us are perfect. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And I think that underneath in there somewhere is this thing that says, oh, you know what? I actually realize that since I'm not perfect, Natasha, I need your feedback. I want your feedback. I want your support. And in my early part of my career, I kind of wanted to portray this perfection kind of a facade that wasn't true. And I really don't know. Natasha, you're kind of nodding. I don't know if you kind of went through a similar transition.
Yes. The realization that I'm not perfect was extremely painful. Like, oh God, I was like, that's not what I was planning to be. I was planning to be pretty perfect. But because you said something like realization that I no longer care. And I want to not correct you in your words, but to just clarify for our listeners that knowing you for many years, I know you do care about how you interact with others and how they experience you and how you impact their experiences. You just don't care about being perfect anymore. Just to be clear. But while we stop our strive for perfectionism, we still want to be better leaders because that's important. That's who we are. We lead others and we can make or break someone's day. We can make or break someone's spirit. And I think it's very important that people understand that a couple of things about feedback. One is that it cannot be a gotcha moment. It cannot be like stopping in a hallway. Oh, Conrad, let me provide you feedback. Unless it's a real time after the meeting, someone said something or a conversation or submitted a document that is full of errors. And then the real time feedback is important, but it's quick. It's like super brave. It's right based on the fact. And it's said, it's done, and we're moving on. But if this is a feedback session that it requires preparation and the time need to be set aside, you can't catch person off guard. People have to be kind of like mentally prepared so that they can curb their defensiveness a little bit up front. And I think that people have to realize that as the receiver is prepping themselves for what they're about to hear, so is the deliverer. Because the person who is providing feedback, especially if it's constructive feedback, and it requires specific examples when a receiver projected particular behavior that need to be corrected or advised about, that the deliverer of feedback is collecting those examples and thinking deeply about how to frame it to make it clear what the person is trying to say, not sugarcoat enough so the person on the receiving side will be confused, but to be clear, to be specific, to give examples, and for both sides to realize that neither of them would be investing their time and emotional resources and collecting the courage of having an honest conversation if they wouldn't care. If they wouldn't care about the opinion, if they wouldn't care about success of a person, if they wouldn't care about joint experience working together, and those who is in a leadership position, that person would not care about elevating the person who they're providing feedback to. It's almost like counterintuitive that when I'm providing critical feedback, I'm not trying to put you down. I'm actually wanting you to hear it. And it will take you up because it will show you something that maybe you are not good at yet, but I'm giving you a recipe on how to get better.
Well, it sounds to me like step one is create that culture, right? Where you have those kinds of relationships with your teammates, where they're open to receiving feedback and they won't respond defensively. But I think your point, Natasha, around the timing of the feedback is so important. Often, missed by many people, because if I look at a lot of kind of corporate performance management programs, they'll force you to ask for feedback once or twice a year, and that process feels so artificial. It feels rushed. It doesn't feel like honest or trust based. So I think the more important feedback happens in the day-to-day job, like you were saying. And I think the lesson here that you've been talking about is about picking your moment, right, to provide the feedback. Here's a good example. You're in a meeting and your colleague is pitching something to a client or doing something that's sort of relatively high stakes. They do a decent job, but in the process, you picked up a few things that they can improve, right? I'm not going to pick up the phone or go to that person right after the meeting and say, oh, that was great, but X, Y, Z. What I would do sometimes, I'd let them ride the high, right? I want them to enjoy the success they just had, right? Kind of soak it in. And I want to, at that point, I want to give them all the positives only, without any of the negatives, right? Then a week later, and like you were saying, maybe a lower stress environment, or maybe when you're out having a drink or catching or coffee or something. At that point, I would bring up, oh, by the way, do you remember the other day when we were doing X, Y, and Z? Obviously you did these things great, but here's a couple things just to take forward, right? So you find the situation that's low stress, low pressure to provide the feedback. That's sort of something that I've had to kind of figure out as you go, right? The timing and it's a bit of an art. You really got to read the person and read the room. Don't know, Conrad, if you've got any views on that.
Yeah, you're reminding me of this model that I learned at Intel, and I'm really curious about you guys, your feedback about this, right? The science of like training a dolphin or a dog or something is that the way that you get the dolphin or the dog to do what you want them to do isn't by giving them constructive feedback, honestly. You want the dolphin to jump. I always went to like at SeaWorld, the whistle, I thought, well, this whistle is telling them what to do. And it turns out the whistle is just feedback like an autoboy. Like, great job. That's just what I wanted. It's just what I wanted. It's just what I wanted. And that comes right after they do something that's just what they wanted. So they say, hey, do this. You do it. It works great. They give a whistle. Everyone's happy, right? And so, in that context, whoever came up with the training at Intel basically said there's feedback and there's advice. And these are different things. And feedback, just like you were just saying, feedback is positive by design, and it should come right after somebody does something well, because you actually want to go, blow the whistle almost, like if you think about the dolphin example, like, hey, great job. What we tend to want to do is what you said that you were holding back from is like, give that advice, like, oh, it was amazing, but if you would just do this, 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 and that, it would be even more amazing. And what, the model basically said, hold that advice until the person is actually ready to do it again. Like, okay, they have these challenges with the presentation. Okay, 2 months before that next presentation isn't the best time to help them with that advice. The advice is better like 2 days before the presentation, or while the deck is being prepared, or sometimes even going into the room, like, hey, you seemed really uncomfortable. Like a pat of confidence and feedback and encouragement walking into the room could be 1,000 times more valuable, 10 minutes before the next time than 10 or 20 minutes or 2 days after the last time. So I think it's a really interesting model. I do find myself sometimes holding back and going, okay, I'm not going to say that. I haven't completely patterned my way into this model, but it feels like it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Natasha, I don't know. Well, I mean, we've talked about picking your moment, and I really like that example, Conrad, around sort of the equivalence to SeaWorld. And, I have a dog, and I use clicker training, or the advisors use clicker training in the same way, right? So the first instance, when the dog does what you need them to do, you do the clicker and you give them the reward. And I guess is the point here then to be more immediate with positive feedback and time the negative feedback? Is that?
I mean, that's what I did. That's what I did this feedback advice model, right? Is if I want to help you be successful with making constructive changes, that I need to be really thoughtful about when I give you the feedback to those constructive changes. And it might be 5 minutes before, and it might actually be 5 months before, because 5 months before you're starting the process of something where you can actually, but the idea was time that feedback to where it can actually be put into action. I think it actually starts reinforcing this message of positive intent. I'm giving this feedback because I'm helping you be successful. Like, I'm here to help you be successful. Let's do this together. Or, I do think there's something really meaningful in this, the timing of constructive feedback. Let me just say, the reason that this model really frustrates me a little bit is because it doesn't feel like there's always a great way to get that constructive feedback to somebody, and it might be forgotten, or it might not be as deliverables oriented as it will come up again. And if you see one of these blind spots with me, like Natasha's talking about, like, I want to hear that. I want to do something about that. I want to trust you, and I want you to trust me. And so this very transactional sort of whistling and feedback thing, I don't know if that misses the underlying opportunity to help me see my blind spots and improve them, or if that is in fact exactly what it does. Because, the idea of like the dog training you're talking about is all that other feedback, constructive or whatever, doesn't actually get through to the dog. Like, the only thing that works is that positive feedback. And if you, and what that would indicate is that I'm going to reinforce your strengths. And I don't know how to actually, like with the dog, I guess it's like nudging and, okay, jump, and you kind of nudge them, or roll over, and you kind of help them roll over. So I guess that's the constructive equivalent of that. And then when they do it, you get the whistle, but I don't know. In some ways, it almost feels manipulative. Like, my whole purpose of this relationship is to get you to do what I want you to do, right? Like, jump through the hoop or roll over or whatever. It's easy to make it, it's easy to fall to the trap of that. Like, why am I doing this? And I do think it isn't about me, like my life's better because you're going to roll over or you're going to jump. It's having that positive intent. Like, I'm trying to help you be more successful. You grow your career, you grow your capability.
Yeah. I guess the big question there then, Conrad, that gives way to is, when you're providing the feedback, how do you make sure the feedback is actionable, right? And I think as you were talking there, I just thought to myself, is it really about the feedback? When it's positive, it's positive. The person knows what they did was right. They're just going to keep doing it. They're going to lean into it, right, and develop. But when it's constructive, you need to be careful how you phrase it, right? So you need to make sure, you don't deflate the person, as we've been talking about. But then exactly what you're saying, how do you then help that person work on that change, that behavioral change, the modification that they need to make? Because they might not be able to do it on their own. So I'm just wondering, does the process of feedback, does it really stop with just the giving and receiving of feedback and the providing feedback? Don't you need to then, hold that person, help them through that next bit? And I don't know what that looks like. It might be, for example, committing to something. So saying, you know what, this is a bit of constructive feedback. Next time round, this is the opportunity, which, I'm going to give you to go and try that out, right? And see if you can make a change there, right? So you need to sort of create that safe space, and you also need to help them, not just with advice, but maybe sometimes with training, it could be many things. Natasha, I don't know, how have you managed those sorts of development side of it? After the feedback, how do you deal with the development side of things?
Yeah, I can tell you just very practically what worked for me in the past. I had 10 direct reports, 10 senior directors. And once a quarter, they were writing to each other, one thing you rock at. Like, just one thing you rock at. And then one unlock that you need to work on to reach your full potential that will take you to the next level. So one thing you rock at, one unlock. And it was written, and so from everyone to each other. So I would receive 10, and each of them would receive 10 from the rest of us. We'll sit on it, and a week later, we would have a leadership team meeting, and everyone would read their things that they rock at, and they will also see the reaction in the room, and they will comment. Individuals will comment if they see a theme in what they do well. And then they will read their unlocks. And everyone is in the room, so people know that if there is, it has to be transparent, right? And everyone reads their unlocks, and then they include their unlocks in their development plan. And the next quarter, when we have the same feedback review session, they start with the unlock that was suggested to them in a previous quarter before, and they share their personal perspective if they feel that they progressed in their unlock. All right, and when you do it first time, people come like very cautious. When on the third or fourth time, they actually started saying that maybe we should do it more frequently. It's kind of like the first time when the leader brings up anything feedback related, especially in a culture where it's not common, it's always a struggle for people to adapt it, to be open, to feel that there's a trust, and the comment just to be safe, right? But if they see that the leader themselves are open to receive it, that they act upon it, that they take everything into consideration, that they make concerted efforts, or if they see that it's just the one person opinion versus the theme, they say it's kind of like, I hear you, I analyzed it, I don't believe that this is my main derailer, or that this is the weakness that requires me to put significant amount of efforts. I think that was just a situational mishap, right? And
I love that. I think that is such a great framework, and I don't know if I haven't heard it done before the way you've described. Around the one thing you rock at and the one unlock, for example, and having that kind of openness to be able to do that. I think that's so great.
I must bring it back myself. Sorry, Conrad.
I love bringing that back to the next session, that like stitching it together that way. That's really cool. Well, I love this conversation. I think this is really, like I said earlier, this is something we all need to do. We all need to support. And, I don't know when somebody arrives at a place where that little trigger inside themselves doesn't get uncomfortable delivering constructive feedback or receiving constructive feedback, but it's just so important to do. I would give a little shout out to the book No Rules by Reed Hastings. It's Netflix culture book, and he talks extensively in chapter 2 about feedback. He gives a framework for it. I really would strongly encourage everyone to go out. I mean, the whole book is amazing, but this concept of feedback and how to receive feedback and how to deliver feedback is awesome. It's just really, it's super important at an individual level, at a team level. I mean, imagine at a world level, if our world leaders were actually, properly giving and receiving feedback, the world would be a different place.
Absolutely. I think what a great topic. Thank you both so much for your insight. We talked a lot about receiving, about requesting feedback, being open to it, making sure that you realize it's about finding your blind spots, be proactive about it. We talked about how you receive it and that you need to be consistent and you need to take action when you get the feedback. And we talked about fostering a culture that allows people to feel comfortable giving you that feedback. And also we talked about the timing. I think there's so many lessons I think that we'll try and summarize and share along with the podcast. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for listening. Do subscribe or check out our next episode. Yeah, thank you. Thank you both, Conrad and Natasha. See you next time.